Estamos convidando você para uma nova rodada de afeto, convergência e aprendizado. Vamos juntos mudar o olhar e o entendimento sobre o transtorno do espectro do autismo. Para isso, este ano propomos juntar dois conceitos essenciais para o desenvolvimento humano: a cultura e a ciência, para promover um grande encontro onde a arte, o movimento, a música, a literatura e outras manifestações culturais vão se somar aos avanços e às novas proposições do saber científico. Vem aí o maior abraço do mundo. Um evento simultâneo ao terceiro Congresso Internacional sobre o Transtorno do Espectro do Autismo, voltado para o acolhimento, a flexibilidade, o aprendizado, a compreensão e o aprimoramento na convivência com pessoas autistas. Um momento de reflexão e afetividade para confirmar que ainda temos muito a aprender e que as crianças e pessoas autistas têm muito a nos ensinar. Amar para entender, entender para amar. Garanta a sua participação.
Olá pessoal, bem-vindo a mais um Desbravando o Autismo, esse programa da Caminho Azul, que nós temos, que apresentam para vocês todas as novidades, o conhecimento novo a respeito do autismo, os grandes pesquisadores, os grandes clínicos, as pessoas que têm se envolvido de uma forma bem íntima e que têm trazido para a gente esse novo mundo do que é o funcionamento do organismo, do desenvolvimento e do autismo propriamente dito, para que nós nos sintamos seguros daquilo que estamos fazendo no dia a dia, né? Nós tivemos várias sessões desde o final do ano passado para cá. Esse programa já falou de neuroinflamação, já falamos de inclusão, já falamos de desenvolvimento osteomuscular e agora a gente está numa nova sessão onde nós estamos trazendo as novidades que serão faladas no Congresso Internacional do Autismo. Esse congresso, que é o Congresso da Caminho Azul, ele vai acontecer no dia 22 a 26 de julho, né, em Niterói, no campus Graboatá. Estamos esperando todos e nós estamos conversando com alguns dos conferencistas que estarão com a gente, né? Nós fizemos a entrevista passada com o Dr. Richard Frye e hoje o Dr. Michael Rich, né? E hoje nós vamos falar com um grande conhecedor de desenvolvimento, de metabolismo, de células do autismo propriamente dito, que é o Dr. Richard Frye. Ele cedeu essa entrevista conosco, ele vai estar presencialmente no congresso conosco e é uma honra tê-lo aqui. Eu vou apresentá-lo em português, eu combinei isso com ele antes, e depois a gente vai abrir a nossa entrevista em inglês e vocês vão ter a legenda que a experiência gentilmente vai preparar para a gente. Tá? Então, o Dr. Frye é um neurologista, especialista em neurodesenvolvimento, em neurometabolismo e transtornos nessas áreas. Ele recebeu o MD e o PhD em Biofísica e Fisiologia na Universidade de Georgetown e completou a residência de pediatria na Universidade de Miami e a residência de neurologia infantil e o fellowship em comportamento, em neurologia do comportamento e nas dificuldades de aprendizado na Universidade de Harvard, no Hospital de Crianças de Boston, né, no Children's Hospital Boston, e um fellowship em psicologia na Universidade de Boston. Ele é o líder, né, de um instituto de pesquisa nacional dos Estados Unidos em autismo. Tá? Ele é o presidente e chefe da Autism Disorder and Treatment do Scientific Office, né? É o fundador-chefe do Medical Office of Neurological Health Foundation, é diretor do Research and Neurologist at Rochdale Medical Center e o investigador principal da Southwest Autism Research and Resource Center. Quer dizer, o currículo dele é algo de extraordinário, um dos maiores pesquisadores de autismo do mundo e é uma honra tê-lo aqui conosco. Bom, gente, muito obrigado pela participação. Nós vamos começar a entrevista, então. So, Dr. Frye, we are very pleased and honored to have you with us in our Desbravando Autismo. Thank you for accepting our invitation, and I hope you enjoy our talk.
Thank you. I'm very excited.
So we are going to start talking about a little bit about yourself. We like to know from your talk a little bit about how you get there, how you become a researcher, how you involved with autism, and how, so everyone can know your story.
Okay, sure, yeah. Yeah, I can, start from the beginning. I actually started out as a researcher and started working in medical research in a hospital, developing some medical equipment and researching it. And I realized that medicine was really interesting. So I decided to try and go to medical school. So, and they accepted me for some reason. I don't know. And so I went through the MD and PhD program at Georgetown University. I was always very interested in neurology, and I really fell in love with child neurology when I was went through it in medical school. And so I, did my 2 residencies. So child neurology, I have 2 residencies. I did pediatrics down in Miami at University of Miami, Jackson Memorial Hospital, and then child neurology in Boston Children's Hospital. And so during my residency, I got very interested in learning disabilities. So how kids learn, how kids develop. And I actually did a fellowship, a separate fellowship in learning disabilities after my residency. So learning disabilities, we would see kids with dyslexia and other types of learning problems, in our big clinic. We had a big comprehensive clinic to evaluate them. But then when I went into my private clinic, this was the time when autism was starting to be more recognized, and they had people, schedule appointments to get their kid with autism evaluated. And I said, well, who are we going to send them to? And he said, okay, well, I guess we'll send them to this guy that knows something about development, And so I started to see these kids. I didn't really know much about autism. And parents said to me, well, my kid got diagnosed with autism, and they say they don't know what causes it, and they really don't know what to do about it except some educational therapies. But I think it has something to do with the brain, and you're a neurologist, so maybe you could figure it out. So I took it as a challenge. At our center, we were very interested in different types of epilepsies that look like autism, are involved in autism. So I said, one thing I could do is I can, do an EEG. I'm a neurologist. I know how to do that, look at brain waves. And then I had a patient with a mitochondrial disorder. And I had always been interested in that when I was in pediatrics. So I said, oh, look at this. And I started to realize that some of these kids, there's some emerging literature that they're mitochondrial disorders. So well, I can test for that too. So now I can do EEGs and I can test for mitochondrial disorders. And then what happened is when I went out to work, and get my first jobs, I would go into the neurology department, and all these kids with autism started coming to neurology departments, and the neurologists didn't know what to do with them. So everywhere I went, they said, oh, you know about autism? I'll give you all my patients. Suddenly I was a specialist in autism.
It's very interesting because the knowledge about neurodevelopment and neurodevelopment disorder is changing. Once we thought that we only look into the brain, we only look into what's right or wrong in the brain, which region is working, which region is not working. We even study the balance between hemispherics and dysplasia and other neurological problems. But the interesting thing when we started to look at the cellular module, it's like every cells in the body are altered with the genetic problems or even the cellular problems. So you started to think either if and if the autism is not only in the cellular brain, um, and instead of that, and at the same time, we are learning how microglia is working, how the brain is being built by the immunological system and metabolic system, and all these things is getting together, and how you started to think like this whole system could work together and be dismissed or disabled in autism. Can you talk about that a little bit for us?
Yeah, no, I mean, I think it goes back to, medicine, how we're taught medicine, and even how, I know it's how we, as doctors, how we document and we bill for our services, right? There's only so many things we could bill for. So if there's no code for it, then it must not exist. And so, that's kind of a problem, because medicine inherently is not made to look at be integrative and look at how different parts of the body work together. You have specialists for this part of the body, that part of the body, the other part of the body, as if they were all separate and they didn't affect each other. And we know, even if it was just in the brain, that other things in the body, that people that have even other types of neurologic or psychiatric disorders and such, that many things in the body, they're very sensitive. So many things that the food that they have, their GI system, how it works, their immune system, when they get sick, we see that behavior in many people, or, psychiatric disorders get worse when they're sick. And you can make a, kind of a fancy model of how the microglial cells do this and this, but you know how it is. You don't feel well when you're sick. And if you already, you're not doing well to begin with, it adds on things. So, and of course there might be, and there is more sophisticated, interactions. But, it's just trying to show the ridiculousness of thinking that, each part of the body, is working separately. So, and we know, it seems like some of the kiddos, right, genetic disorders, metabolic disorders, this is affecting every cell in the body. And so we have to understand, it's not just one cell. And then we learn about that, right, is that we think of this gene as a synaptic gene, but maybe another part of the body is doing something else, So we have to kind of get away from that reductionist type of, thinking, and look at more integrative thinking to see how things work, and to look at the whole patient, because you can't fix somebody or fix a child by just doing one thing. That's one of the other things that's very difficult. You can't give the pill. I've had patients not come back to my clinic because they said, "Dr. Frye, you didn't give me the autism pill." As if it's that easy, but that's how we're kind of, we learn that, you have a disease, you go get the pill for it.
Yes. It's interesting that, because when we start to see the genes that are altered in these autistics that have this genotype way of having autism, mutations and the genes involved in autism, there are also genes involved in immune system problems. The most of them are altered in the immune system. So this communication between systems, do you think the immunological system do this communication between other systems and the brain?
Oh yeah, well, first of all, I mean, the kind of philosophy I use is what we see in a lot of individuals with all neurodevelopmental disorders, not just autism, that there's kind of three pillars of things that are dysfunctional, and that's the immune system, but also mitochondria, and then oxidative stress or redox regulation. And the thing is, these all influence each other. If you have mitochondrial dysfunction, it's actually going to affect the immune system. And that way, because the immune system needs a lot of energy to work. And if it doesn't work right, it's going to cause inflammation, which is going to cause oxidative stress, which is then going to cause, more mitochondrial dysfunction. So, it's this vicious circle that happens, and it may happen one place in one person and one place in another. But definitely one of the things we see is dysfunction of the immune system, and in many different ways. Many times we see overactivity of the immune system, and many times we see underactivity of the immune system too. Immunologists, that see some of these would say it's kind of interesting, because a lot of the kids you see autoantibodies to the brain in actually have a underfunctioning immune system instead of the overfunctioning that you see like in an autoimmune disease. So it's very complicated. And then I think the thing we're really realizing, not just how these kind of disorder of the immune system, say making antibodies to the brain or something, works, that there's other problems, such as the fact that the immune system is innate to the brain growth and development. So one thing we know is that, part of the first years of life is pruning of synapses. So you have too many synapses, and then you start to prune those. And so what we do know is that the immune system and microglial cells are important in that process. They go in there and they actually eat up those synapses that we don't need. So if they're not working, you're not going to eat up those right synapses, and you're going to have too many connections. So all these things work together in many different ways.
It's very interesting. When I read your work for the first time, it was like 2008. And I was starting to understand this. It's like a puzzle. But I try to divide the inflammation. It was in my brain. I don't know if it's working, if we can tell in this way, but I try to divide inflammation in two types of inflammation, but they are connected. The oxidative stress, it's like an intracellular inflammation, and this neuroimmunology, this immunology inflammation, this disturb of this immunological system that disrupt other systems, because I think we cannot think the immune systems like defense systems anymore. He's like the constructor. He's like the repair. And so if he's not balanced, you have this inflammation. And inflammation is important for development. You have to have the right inflammation. You cannot inflammate more or less. You have to have the right inflammation. So I try to separate the oxidative stress inflammation and the immunological inflammation, so we can work better in a clinical way. Do you think it's logical that?
Yeah, no, I think that is a good point, of where it's coming from. And there are different types of inflammation or immune dysfunction, and I don't think that we can put them all into one category. And that's what makes it a puzzle, is that there's many different types, and they're not clear. And even those kind of overlap in a lot of different ways. So, we also have problems with a mast cell too. There seems to be a group that have, very activation of the mast cells and lots of allergies and such. And they seem to be a separate group, and that's yet another type of dysfunction of the immune system, So it's nice to make all these, kind of large categories, but there's a lot of detail in it, and it's very much a puzzle, and how it interacts with the other systems are very important.
And then we have the mitochondria complex, that is another universe of knowledge, and how it is on the cellular biology, but influences the whole system. Once I started to realize the mitochondria, is like Faraday. How do you, do you remember the Faraday that isolates electromagnetic fields?
Oh, you mean like the electricity that goes from one pole to the other?
Yeah, it's like that because there's this net of this net of mitochondria that is in the that protects. I think it protects the nucleo, the ribosomal, and all the proteomics, and gives energy. And the technology, it's a very it's a huge technology that we're trying to understand. So we are now talking about mitochondrial dysfunction. It's not a disability; it's a dysfunction. It's a problem that we cannot measure by uh, genes or how can we measure that, but because it's very important and it's linked with oxidative stress.
Yeah, no, it's very important, and that's where there's been some kind of pushback from the community. I think of that things with mitochondrial disease, and we know that about 5% of kids with autism have what you could diagnose as mitochondrial disease, which is very low functioning mitochondria, about 20%, and usually associated with a gene, a genetic problem. In our review back in 2013, we showed that. Even the 5% that are diagnosed with strict mitochondrial disease, that only about 25% of them could they find a gene to account for that. So, there must be something else going on. And so we know that, there was the other study by the Mind Institute where they looked at immune cells, and they found that 80% of those cells, the immune cells they looked at, had mitochondrial dysfunction. So, and people say, well, what is mitochondrial dysfunction? Fortunately, we don't have a very strict criteria of it, but, you can think of it as, well, you have mitochondrial disease where the mitochondria isn't working at all, and mitochondrial dysfunction, one form where maybe the mitochondria is working 50% of normal. You say, well, the mitochondria is still working. Yeah, but if, your car only had 2 tires instead of 4, it's not going to get very far. So, so we have to kind of think of that, and that's why we know that boosting up the mitochondria so that it works better can really be helpful. And then we found this other flavor. A lot of the research we've been doing for over a decade is we've shown that about a third of the kiddos with autism have overactivity of the mitochondria. So the mitochondria is actually running about 200% of normal. Yeah. So, and of course, at first people said, so what? Maybe it's a really good mitochondria, and then what we showed is that what it is, it's very vulnerable to any type of physiological stress. Any type of physiological stress makes it crash very easily. So, and then, we've also, we've linked it to neurodevelopmental regression. We just had a paper that came out. It was the second paper showing that in kids with neurodevelopmental regression, they have this pattern, and then we've also linked it to environmental influences, prenatal environmental influences. So, the mitochondria is really important. One, because I think, as you were saying, it's the center of everything, right? Everything runs through it, and it affects everything, And then 2, it's the environmental sensor. It's very sensitive to the environment, and it controls the cell by understanding what's in the environment. So you're going to influence it by any type of environment that may be, adverse. And that's not just like chemicals and such, but that could be inflammation too. If you have, very bad inflammation, that can damage the mitochondria.
And we are talking about one of the most studied causes of autism is environmental changes. So that makes sense. That makes sense. And I read in your paper that the mitochondria that is hyperactivity, it works like an explosion, hyperactivity for less time. and then it get exhausted.
Exactly, it gets exhausted very fast. It's like, yeah, and we think that it's a reaction to a poor microenvironment in the cell. We think that's kind of the reaction. It's trying to compensate for things, and by doing that, it's trying to work harder. But it's just like anything. If you were, you were to run away from a giant wave that's coming at you, you're eventually going to tire out, and the waves get you.
Yeah, it's very. Do you think this hyperexcitation has anything linked with the hyperactivity and the hyperexcitation that we see in the behavior?
Yeah, I mean, we see different symptoms depending on the type of mitochondrial issues. Definitely, hyperactivity can be seen in either way, because what happens is hyperactivity really is a poor regulation of behavior by the frontal lobe.
But
It may be with poor mitochondrial function or hyperactive mitochondrial function. With poor mitochondrial function, what we do see is that we see fatigue. So the kids run around, and then they crash. And I had one patient recently that got treated with a mitochondrial disorder who started having more energy, and then she became hyperactive. Because she had the energy to become hyperactive.
Oh, interesting.
So yeah, I mean, it is an issue because there's so many of these symptoms that overlap in so many different ways.
Yeah, it's very interesting. And I think this energy it's all the cell needs to organize itself. So when the energy is less or excessive, all the proteomics are changed. So you published even the link between mitochondrial dysfunction and the RNA function and the microRNA function, because I think microRNA are like this. How do you call the boss of the transcription?
Right, and they regulate the cell, so they're very important. And the more we learn about them, we learn how the cell is regulated. And then the good thing is that they are designing treatments using blocking RNAs so that you can manipulate those. So yeah, it's a very advanced and very interesting technology. And so yeah, we like one thing I think you have to realize is that you have to take it from all angles. Right? You can't just look at it from the RNA angle or the oxidative stress angle, the immune angle. All these things come together, and that's the complexity of it.
And have you seen already when you change the environment, like enriching the environment with natural, more exposure and therapy and healthy environment? Have you seen these works on mitochondrial dysfunction?
Yeah, I mean, I haven't measured that, but I would believe that it would, and I get a lot of anecdotal reports from my patients that they love to take their kids like up to the mountains or to the beach, and they feel so much better, when they're out there, if they live in the city, because there's less noise, there's less pollution, you get cleaner air, cleaner water. So yeah, I think there's a lot to that, and you can think of if you live in the city about how you're bombarded with so much, every day, that if you were sensitive to everything, you would be completely debilitated. But luckily, most of us are able to filter all that out, and just focus on what we want to do. But I think a lot of kids with autism, that's a big part of it, is the sensitivities, not only to environmental chemicals and infections, but to sensory overload. And so there's all these pieces that go together that can cause the issue with the disability. But I definitely think that changing environment, being in a cleaner environment, a more natural environment for many patients, that improves things. And the opposite's true too. I had a lot of patients from Northern California when they had the fires. The parents were calling up because their kids had, behavioral exacerbations, and they wanted to know why. And I think it was very much because of all the toxic smoke in the air. They're very sensitive to it.
Yeah, interesting. And do you think music exposure to good music and harmonics, do you think it can influence on mitochondrial function or cellular function and behavior function because of the alteration on mitochondria, because of the influence on mitochondria?
Well, I definitely think that music is good in many different ways. One, it's calming, which is going to bring down all your stress hormones, which can damage the mitochondria. So that's going to be really good. And then, the brain works on harmonics, right? We have our brain waves, they work on harmonics. And so, I think music, is integrated, and then the brain starts to actually pick up these melodies and to actually calm it down and synchronize itself more. So in some ways, I think it kind of takes out that noise from the brain. And that's why it's great for kids with autism. Music therapy, I always tell, parents, if they can get it, that's a terrific thing to do. And if they do, they say how much their kids love the music therapy because it's so calming to them.
Yeah, I have this experience here too. Yeah. And one thing that it's very disable or in autism is the sleep.
Yes. Yeah.
One of the things that are disrupted is sleep. And how do you think the sleep could help? How can we help sleep, and how sleep can help the biology and the cellular function and the integrated systems?
Well, sleep is absolutely essential. So, I mean, two of the things that I look at first when I see a patient is the gut and sleep. Because those are two things that will cause a lot of issues with behavior and learning. So, one of the things we know from sleep is that if you don't sleep, just normal people, if they don't sleep, they won't learn. So they've done these studies, and they show that if you deprive somebody from sleep and you teach them something one day, they won't remember it the next day. So and we know that that's so important because one, we think sleep is just resting the brain, but it isn't. It's the time when everything you learn during the day gets integrated into your brain and hardwired. So if you don't do it, you kind of lose everything. And then the other thing that's kind of cool, which we've learned, is that during deep sleep, your brain cleans itself out. It flushes itself out and gets rid of all the garbage. And that's really important. That's really important to get everything out of there and refresh the brain. And that's something we're learning more and more about. So if you don't get good sleep, you're not going to be in good shape. Now, kids with autism, it's clear that they don't make melatonin very well. They have disrupted melatonin cycles. So they don't even have a sleep signal. So they can just be free running until they pass out. And that's why melatonin is the first, course of action to try and really, get a kid to sleep, along with a routine, which can be very useful because kids like routines. You find a routine, and then they can go to bed and use some melatonin. There's lots of studies that have shown that not only improves sleep and getting kids to sleep, but improves behavior the next day and the ability to learn the next day. But sometimes, you have two things, right? And parents get frustrated because they say, well, I give the melatonin and the kid goes to sleep, but then they wake up at 1 a.m, right? So there's two problems. There's getting to sleep and staying asleep. And the staying asleep, you have to be very careful because you could try just a drug to keep them asleep. And sometimes you have to do that. But a lot of times it's due to GI issues or other types of issues that, wake them up in the middle of the night. So that's why you have to really keep a close eye to see if is there something disturbing them at nighttime, that's waking them up in their body. And sometimes and if you fix some of those things, sometimes it is. Sometimes if you fix the metabolic systems, their sleep is better. But sometimes you do use medications to have them sleep through the night, because sleep is so incredibly important, to help refresh the body. And then also, if you have an underlying mitochondrial problem, it compounds things, right? Because then you're using more energy during the day, and your mitochondria are already, not making enough energy for your body. And so then you don't sleep, it's making more and more, and it doesn't give the time for the mitochondria to rest and repair itself. And then, of course, the other thing that's really important, and we actually wrote a paper on this, is that when the kid isn't sleeping, the parents aren't sleeping. So it's not only the kid that's irritable in the morning, but everybody in the house.
It's very interesting. And there's this huge line of study seeing melatonin differently, not only as a sleep hormone, but also has an influence on mitochondria and oxidative stress. So there are athletes that are using melatonin to eliminate oxidative stress during the training.
Yeah.
Very interesting.
Yeah, there's high dose studies on high dose melatonin. Yeah, that repair mitochondria and actually help with mitochondrial function. Yeah, it's very interesting. So much, we don't realize and we don't know even about natural things.
Yeah. I think I saw some papers showing that mitochondria is now, they are seeing that is being produced by trophoblasts in placenta for helping babies to alleviate oxidative stress during pregnancy.
Wow, I haven't seen that one yet.
Yeah, it's very interesting how the mother produces melatonin on placenta for the baby, and it's I don't I they are saying that it helps on circadian rhythm, but it's more for oxidative stress, for protecting the baby. So
Wow,
I think
that's
melatonin,
interesting.
yeah, it's very interesting. And then we go to the GI. I think it's I am very interested in knowing much more, because when you disable immunology on pregnancy, you starts to have problems on feeling the environment because of neurological problems. Also, the motor system and the muscular system starts to be disabled too, and the gut starts to not work. And the muscular part of the gut does not work well. So and you have the immunological problems, and you have this bacterial dysfunction on the gut, and all these things together. You have the celiac plexus not working well because of the hyperexcitation either. So there's a lot of inflammatory things helping to disrupt the GI. And I recently saw a paper published in 2024 that like 83% of autistic children will have to have a gastropediatrician on their way of developing, and 60% of them will need a endoscopy evaluation because of reflux, allergy, and not only microbiota disruption. So there's a lot of working to do on GI. Can you explain to us about a little bit the evolution of this knowledge?
Yeah, I know. We're learning so much more and more, and it should have been obvious in some ways before, because we know that about 70% of the immune system is in the gut. So anything that goes through the gut or lives in the gut is going to influence the immune system. So we know that, we used to think that the bacteria in our gut didn't really do anything and they were contaminants. And now we understand that bacteria not only helps with digestion, but also it processes vitamins for us. It makes essential chemicals. It helps program, it helps make neurotransmitters. It helps program the immune system, most importantly. The disruption, of the microbiota, which seems to be a common theme in children with autism, is yet another, factor which can be very disturbing because it can result in many types of GI disorders. One of the things that we get very worried about is the fact that the gut can become more permeable, increased permeability of the gut. And so then what happens is that large pieces of things, before they're broken down, get into the body. They bypass the gut, and the immune system starts to react to them. And so then you can have an overactive immune system, lots of inflammation just starting in the gut because of increased permeability. And then that can cause inflammation and dysregulation of the immune system all over. So it seems to be really important. We know that, of course, as you say, gastroesophageal reflux, eosinophilic esophagitis, and some of these things, it's really fascinating. They're not obvious because the kids can't talk to us, and many of the symptoms are repetitive behaviors, things that we look at as repetitive behaviors, but the behaviors that are resulting in pain, and the child can't tell you. And so sometimes you do have to do a scope to figure out, what's going on, down there. Luckily, we're starting to do the microbiome transplants, which it looks to be very promising. We just finished an adult study with it, and now they've got it to the point where it's we used in the adult study an enteric-coated capsule. So everything is put into a capsule just like a medication, and you can take it like a medication, and it goes down to the right part of the gut, and then replaces the bad microbiome with good microbiomes. So that's the ultimate to be able to do that routinely. So
very interesting. And you got the microbiota from the parents?
You probably don't get it from the parents. There's certain algorithms that have been developed to predict the good donors.
The good donor. Oh, okay.
It's hard work, but someone has to do it.
You gotta select your donor. Yeah.
Exactly. So there's all type, because you share, you're in the same environment, you're going to share part of your microbiome with your child, so you don't want to do that. And then and so you want to get it and then you don't want people that have any GI problems, and GI problems are pretty prominent. So it's hard to find the good microbiome. Yeah, but they've looked at it. They have all kinds of computer algorithms to do these things to find who has the good stuff.
Interesting. And might be a person in the same geological province, because each geological place has this different microbiome because of the environment.
Yeah, you're right. Yeah, I don't know if they've matched up to those, that type of detail, but I bet you're right. By the different environments, you'd probably want to get somebody from the same type of environment too, so that it'd be used to tolerating the same type of things. Yeah.
It's interesting. We have like 2 or 3 patients in our group that when the immunologist evaluates the patient, he was like immunodepressive, and when we correct the gut microbiota or infections, the immunosuppression disappear. Like the gut was kidnapping immunological cells.
Yeah.
And we never heard about that.
Yeah, it's amazing how much influence it has on the immune system. Yeah. So yeah, it's one of the primary places you have to look to get things, better. Of course, it's just one piece of it, right? It's still a big puzzle. So you have to find all the other pieces too.
Yeah. And we are getting to the end, but we are pleased to have with us in our Congress. And if you can do a highlight about your conference, your talk, and invite everyone to come to see you. It's your first time in Brazil, yes?
Yes, it's my first time. I've heard such great things, and I know many people from Brazil over the years. So they're a lot of fun. So.
And can you do a highlight about your presentation?
Sure. Yeah, I'm going to be talking about some of the new treatments and the new science that we have that we found, and give some highlights of maybe some things that are more mature that we can start using in the clinic, rather than stuff that's out in research. So it'll give some practical tips of things that you can help understand more about autism and what's going on, and help use it when you go back to see your patients.
Very interesting, because it's time for us to do this translational way of the information to get clinical practice. And there's so many biomarkers that we can use, and we don't know how to use it. And there's a lot of treatment that it's new, and we can feel safe to use it in our clinical practice. Not all of new treatments are this huge, expensive treatments.
Right.
This treatment that we can use in a cheap way, everyone can use, but has to do it right.
Right. Exactly.
Okay. So I would like to thank you very much, Mr. Frye, Dr. Frye, for being with us today, and I hope everyone enjoy this interview. And if everyone could invite them to our meeting, it will be very nice. Thank you very much for being with us.
Yeah, my pleasure. Thank you so much for inviting me.
Thank you. Então, gente, nós tivemos aqui com o Dr. Richard Frye, com o Dr. Richard Frye. A gente queria agradecer muito a presença dele e convidar vocês para o nosso congresso, que a gente vai ter do dia 22 ao dia 26 de julho de 2024 agora. Muito obrigado pela audiência de todos vocês. Vocês possam espalhar essas informações para que todos possam ter acesso. Muito obrigado, Deus abençoe e até a próxima.